Hello, fellow Earthlings. My name is Ginger Ferrer. For anybody who's watching for the first time, I'm a community advocate, and I've been on the air 13 years. Before I begin this program, I wanted to send my condolences to the family, friends, and co-workers of Kayla Mueller. My sincerest condolences on the loss of your daughter, sister, friend, and co-worker. She dedicated herself to the highest level of humanitarianism in her works. The sadness of her loss will be remembered because of the kind of thoughtful, giving human being she was, and the dreadful taking of her life. Last week, I forgot all my material because I had my hands full of items I was donating to a charitable organization, and I didn't realize that I hadn't put on top of the boxes my little attaché case or briefcase, and so I had to kind of stumble through that program. And I spoke about Sylvia Browne's Secret Societies, and her book is still available. And I wanted to touch on a lot of things, but before I do that, I want to read to you the content of a February the 11th email that I received from Deborah Olsa. She's with Education Matters, and she wrote, "The Board of School Committee should not reverse its decision concerning its decision to eliminate the Smarter Balanced Assessment in Manchester at tonight's meeting, February the 11th. The board decided to use NWEA, which I don't know what those letters mean, and I have to look it up, in the district for student assessment instead. For a reason, it's been working fine. Stick to that reason. Nothing has changed in assessing students in Manchester for meaningful academic baseline information for teachers to help students accept threats of losing the money from the Department of Education. To turn around now and inflict more hours of computerized assessment on students by adding the Smarter Balanced Assessment on the top of NWEA is cruel and unfair to students whose parents are uninformed, because only informed parents will know how to refuse the invalid and time-wasting SBAC assessment for their child unless the board provides the SBAC refusal form for all parents to consider using." Now, that just so smacks of trying to get in under a perceived procedure without true transparency and contacting the parents of each and every child who may be involved in these circumstances. The truly disturbing perceived processes of shackling the education systems of this country smack of totalitarianism on a national scale. Since recorded time, human beings have been used and abused to serve the abusers, to deny their human rights, to enslave for the perceived sole purpose of holding hostage and or allowing any one of the billions of human lives that have existed and vanished in our world and in our country over millennia. In our country, slaves were not allowed to learn how to read and write. Why? Because their enslavers knew if they were allowed education, they would be capable of thinking and doing self-liberating thoughts and actions. They had to crack the whip every single day of their shackled lives. No education, it was a threat to their control factor. And it would appear that in our current time frame of these United States, these mindsets wear different robes of title even within the education community. They appear to need to shackle as many future students as possible in order to have the slave labor that will be the outcome of those who cannot meet the so-called education factors of so-called teaching and learning, not to mention the selectiveness that will definitely be a contributing factor in keeping children uneducated. As I have mentioned many times over the past few years, there is a book by George Orwell, The Time Machine, where he writes about the future of humankind ending up mind-controlled by the lowest form of humankind in order to keep their needs furnished by these innocent and almost catatonic human beings who, when they hear the sound of a very loud horn, they blindly walk into an opening in a cave, and they are never to be seen again, used as slave labor and other unspeakable manner. Education is the right of every single child, no matter their race, gender preference, or disability. Mr. Gatzis has reached out to Chicago, Illinois for information on how to educate the children of New Hampshire. Why? Who are the people at the Department of Education? What is their agenda in these concerns? Who is providing these programs, and why aren't parents being advised? Who are the manufacturers of these perceived processes? What kind of money is being dealt with here, and who are the beneficiaries of these perceived complicit men and women who appear willing to destroy the rights of education for each and every child nationwide? Consider that violation by itself. It is like rigging an American family of their constitutional rights to be informed and or to protect their children, to be fully and honestly advised as why this or that program appears to be beneficial or not for the education of their children. It is shocking and absolutely frightening to witness and hear how this movement is all over our so-called free country. Where are the protections of our country that is supposed to stand for regarding any and every right of a citizen in whatever concern becomes a concern? Are there perks being provided to those who appear to sanction these processes? Is this perceived network so vast that they can get away with what appears to be a united across the board of our 52 states and territories to control and otherwise abuse the educational processes of our country without disclosing or advising parents of these children who may become victimized by these perceived unconstitutional and undisclosed processes and movement? Because the current mayor of New Hampshire is very much involved, I cannot help but wonder what his reasons are for trying to impose these educational shackles on the children of this community. Is there a cronyism factor attached to these issues? How can he or any adult understand the needs of a young child attending school under the oppressive weight of programs that may stunt or otherwise compromise their abilities to handle what appears to be programs that do not foster the best of their learning abilities without the feel of fear and intimidation? Where are the protectors of this country's children regarding their educational rights and the rights of their families to full disclosure of whatever they are trying to get away with? If I am wrong in any way, shape, or form, I would be the first to apologize on air for my perceptions. But for anyone who is watching for the first time, I have been advocating on and off air for 25 and a half years. I have met many citizens of Manchester over the years who have had their rights totally, and I do mean totally, ignored and continuously violated. So unless transparency, also known as full disclosure, becomes a constant and vigorous operational procedure in New Hampshire, the perceptions I and many have will continue. The word regime and totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is described of being related to being or imposing a form in which the political authority exercises absolute and centralized control over all of the aspects. The individual is subordinated to the state, and opposing political and cultural expression is suppressed. A system of highly centralized government in which one political party or group takes control and grants neither recognition nor tolerance to other political groups or the citizens. A form of government in which the state controls every aspect of the individual's life, and all opposition is oppressed and suppressed. And regime, a government, especially an oppressive or undemocratic one, a usually heavy-handed administration or group in charge of an organization. A system, a rule of government that is not of the people, by the people, or for the people, but for the selective few. Now, here's a story about a child, 10-year-old autistic child, who was beaten by a grown-up teacher. The mother of 10-year-old autistic student who says the child was repeatedly punched by his teacher at a Queens public school plans to sue the city for $10 million. Giovanni Garrick says PS 118 teacher Alexander Perry falsely accused the boy, identified as MB, of cheating on a test last month and then pummeled him about the face and back in front of their horrified students. Perry, 36, also cursed at the boy and then threatened the other children at the St. Albans school if they told anyone what had happened, Garrick's lawyer said. The attack was so severe that the assistant teacher of this classroom had to pull this teacher, Mr. Perry, off of the victim, MB, and prevent any further harm, said Cochran firm attorney Derek Sells on Tuesday. The city law department said it would review the claim. A message left at Perry's home was not immediately returned. Now, history continues to repeat itself. This is an autistic child. This is a man who has to outweigh him by at least 50 to 75 pounds, and he's beating on this child endlessly and accusing him of something which may or may not have been the truth. However, that doesn't mean that he had the right to strike this child repeatedly. And that is the biggest bone of contention that I have where children at school are concerned, because that history continues to repeat itself in the clerical school systems. I don't know if it still goes on, but children are treated like this out of control sinner mentality by some of the clergy that teaches these children. You're going to go to hell because you're not a good child. And I heard enough of that to haunt me for the rest of whatever life I have left, and that of other kids that I grew up with and my own sister. You cannot beat a child. You have no right to put your hands on a child. If you're being attacked, it's one thing. But an autistic child, something has to change here. Something has to change. There should be video cameras in school, not only in school hallways and entrances, but in the school classes themselves. So this way, if something is getting out of hand, those that are monitoring those monitors to see if anything is going on can get to it and stop it before it gets out of control, and stop a teacher from striking a child. You know, it's a good thing that I am not a parent anymore, because I think I would end up in jail, because I would end up beating the living hell out of anybody that touched my kid, and that is considered self-defense. You know, I just don't get the mentality. I never have, and I never will. Now, last week I spoke about secret societies, and I just wanted to give you a little sample of some of the perceived luminaries of times past that she references. Three of the worst are Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and another that'll come to me in a minute. Last week I spoke about J. Edgar Hoover, and I had emailed from YouTube to the station, but apparently it's no longer here, a 7 or 8 or 9 to 10 minute clip about J. Edgar Hoover, and the fact that that one of the biggest reasons he was the kind of FBI director. At the beginning, he may have started out as a good guy during the Prohibition era, but when he got into the political arena, he started targeting anybody that he could that had an Achilles heel, so to speak. Anything that had to do with sexuality or any other kind of perceived misconduct by the citizens of our country, or his perception of that. And one of the biggest reasons was because he was not a heterosexual, and that he used to dress in women's clothing. And if enough people know me by now that have watched me, they know how I feel about any human being. I don't care if they're gay or straight. But when they use their sexuality to control other people or other peoples, or use it within the position that they hold that is constitutional, then I take great exception. He did so much damage that it's still going on today, and he's long been dead. And the one thing that really upsets me about Mr. Hoover is that his name is still on the FBI buildings. And in foreign countries, when a dictator is toppled, so all the statuary or anything that pertains to the dictator that is held in a monumental kind of fashion in that community. But in our country, J. Edgar Hoover has been proven to be one of the worst criminals ever, constitutionally speaking. And still the FBI has his name on the FBI buildings in this country. There are 3 levels that she covered in this book, 3 levels of societies. Part 1 is political societies, which incorporates the Skull and Bones, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and the Freemasons. The second is religious societies, the Knights Templar, the Knights of Malta, the Rosicrucian Order, the Priory of Sion, and the Opus Dei. The third one is the dark side of secrecy, the Illuminati. The New World Order, Scan, lies about Jesus Christ, suppression of the Gnostics, Gnostic, conspiracy theories, and corruption. And it just tells you the membership, how it's done, the oath of secrecy, sometimes under penalty of death or excommunication. Members not only pledge to keep all the secrets within the society, but often vow to give away money or other personal possessions to remain a member. The oath against division. Members promise not to deviate from the group's teachings or start their own organization based upon the one to which they've given an oath. They also vowed to always work for the betterment of the society and not for themselves. That didn't work out too well. The oath of absolute obedience. Members pledge to absolutely obey the rules and order of society. They must pay homage to their headmaster or founder, and often but not always follow the laws of the land. There's supposed to be an expected oath of honesty. Members swear that they'll never tell a lie about anyone in the society or about the organization, and they promise to live within the group with honesty and forthrightfulness. The oath of support. Members vow to give support morally, spiritually, or even financially to the society. This can even extend to reporting any insidious conduct that would bring harm to the association. The political societies. For more than 150 years, Skull and Bones had been active at Yale University, also called Chapter 322. Some claim that it is an offshoot of a secret German university society. This group allegedly had a fascist and communist bent with a Hegelerian philosophy of service to the state. Many conspiracy theorists also believe that it was the infamous Thule Society, Thule, whose members went on to form the Nazi Party and has ties with the Illuminati. Apparently, the American branch of this group was founded in 1832 at Yale University by class valedictorian William Russell and his schoolmate Alphonso Taft. Williams was the cousin of Samuel Russell, who made his fortune by smuggling opium to China. And he supposedly struck up a great friendship with a leader of a clandestine German university society during the 2 years he spent studying in Germany. Skull and Bones owns 2 pieces of property they're building on the Yale campus called the Tomb, which is actually quite large, and Deer Island, a private haven on the St. Lawrence River. Naturally, both locations are for the exclusive use of the order. Initiates to the order reportedly have to lie in a coffin naked and tell the sexual history to the other candidates. Whether this is harmless induction or for blackmail purposes, no one really knows. Initiates are also given names that they carry with them for the rest of their lives. For example, the younger President Bush's name is temporarily made of what you will. President Bush's name is temporary. Make that of what which you will. In addition to presidents, there have been at least 28 U.S. senators or congressmen who belong to the order, including James Buckley, Prescott Bush, John Chafee, Thomas Ashley, Jonathan Bingham, David Browne, Thurston Morton, Robert Taft, and John Kerry. Several of the Bonesmen served as cabinet members in various administrations, such as William A. Harriman, and most of us know about George H.W. Bush's involvement with the CIA. There are other books on the subject, fleshing out Skull and Bones, Investigation into America's Most Powerful Secret Society by Chris Milligan. America's Secret Establishment, An Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones by Anthony Sutton. Secrets of the Tomb, Skull and Bones, The Ivy League, and the Hidden Paths of Power by Alexandra Robbins. And you know, if these societies had been generated for the good of all people, especially the American people, it wouldn't have been such a bad thing. But they got control of all of anything that pertains to constitutional expectation. And the violations have been almost without count. And they hold the highest titles in our country, the highest constitutional titles in our country, just like many clergy that hold the highest positions in their particular religious organization, that have covered up for millennia the crimes against their own people. And they have covered it up. They keep it on file. To me, I would burn anything that had to do with prior wrongdoings. The only thing that comes to mind to me is blackmail for future reference. But it's such a massive contradiction of what we expect as believers of the Constitution and all that it entails, from the local to the state to the federal. It doesn't exist as much as it should. It just doesn't appear to. In alphabetical order, here are a few of the more notable CFR members, along with their roles in the American power elite as of this writing. Now, she wrote this book in 2002, so this information is now almost 15 years old. No, 13 years old. It was published in 2007, not 2002. Richard V. Allen, former National Security Advisor. John Bolton, former Ambassador to the United Nations. William F. Buckley, Jr., founder of National Review. George H.W. Bush, former President and CIA Director. Jimmy Carter, former President. Dick Cheney, current Vice President. Bill Clinton, former President, current member of the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Group. John Edwards, former Senator from North Carolina. Dwight D. Eisenhower, former president. Ann Garrels, current correspondent for National Public Radio. Timothy F. Geithner, current president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a Federal Reserve Bank that is illegal in its existence. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives. He's another one. Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. Katherine Harris, former representative from Florida. Herbert Hoover, former president. Jack Kemp, former representative from New York. John Kerry, current senator from Massachusetts. Again, this book was written in 2007, and at the time that she wrote the book, these were the positions some of these men and women held. Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, current member of the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Group. Lyman Leominster, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Robert S. McNamara, former Secretary of Defense and president of the World Bank. Richard Nixon, former president. Colin Powell, former Secretary of State. Dan Rather, former CBS Evening News anchor. Condoleezza Rice, current Secretary of State, former National Security Advisor. David Rockefeller, former chairman of the Trilateral Commission and member of Bilderberg Group. Donald Rumsfeld, former Secretary of Defense and poisoner of the world. Paul Wolfowitz, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, current president of the World Bank. And the reason I say that about Mr. Rumsfeld, for those who are watching for the first time, he was a former CEO of CERL. He was brought into the Reagan administration on the very, very first day of the Reagan administration to orchestrate the lifting of the ban of phenylalanine, also known as aspartame. He, at that time, was the CEO of CERL, and eventually Monsanto bought CERL out, and Mr. Rumsfeld managed to have the ban lifted along with the help of many others. And it has been poisoning human life all over this planet since that happened. I was at the supermarket yesterday, and I was trying to find cookies that weren't too sweet. And so I started reading the labels, and I could not believe that in almost every sugar that was on display that said sugarless, it was sweetened by aspartame. And if you put aspartame or phenylalanine into your computer, PHENYLALANINE, it will define that poisonous chemically generated substance that has killed millions of people all over the planet for the last 25, 30 years since it was lifted. And it's still claiming lives or crippling lives. And Mr. Rumsfeld has never been held accountable, or all of his posse, like Michael Taylor and all the people at the FDA that got into that, they saddled up and they just got right in there. And they have been poisoning people for decades. And this is supposed to be a free country. So it boggles the mind. And I repeat myself where Sylvia Browne is concerned. Not one time has she ever been sued for any of the contents that she has written about. Because she was very, very careful to research, because like many of us, as we grow into maturity, we come to realize that the education we received as children is not the education that we should have received as children, that was kept suppressed and oppressed because the powers that be had the power to make it so. So I just, I don't get who is really protecting us. Who is really protecting us? And why is it that religious orders, and again, please understand that my belief in God is profound. It is the only thing that keeps me going, because I believe that Christ lived on this planet. I believe that he left a lot of positive messages that have been miswritten, misconstrued, or misapplied altogether. Again, I speak about children in the sense that when you put fear into a child as early as 6, 7, 8 years old, and they're in school by the very teachers that are supposed to teach them correctly, what do you think that does to a child? And the fact that a child can be struck by somebody who's angry at them and outweighs them by anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds, or verbally dresses that child down in front of their peer group. It's no way that I can approve that. If a child is out of control and they're striking the teacher, especially a small child, you find a way to hold that child so that he or she will stop doing what they're doing. But to beat a child the way this man did, pummel an autistic child, it just begs the question why. It begs the question why. How do these people get a learning license in the first place? Do they get to see a counselor? Do they get mental health services? Because being a teacher is a very stressful job, especially when you have a lot of children in one room. And each child may or may not be acting as expected. But to strike somebody else's child, or to get the principal or the vice principal, involved, I don't understand how that has been allowed for so long in this country, especially from religious teaching organizations. I know for sure that Christ would have never, ever lifted a finger to hurt a child. He wouldn't do that. Neither would Mary, his mother, or Mary Magdalene. It's something that will go with me to my grave, because I witnessed it, I experienced it, I've seen other kids humiliated. I've read the stories, I've met families that I interviewed when we used to be able to go and interview families when we were at MCAM. I've been to people's homes, and it's astonishing that the school authorities will cover it up rather than address it, rather than protecting the student and protecting the teacher until all the truth is known. You know, in Texas, when I was a kid, I've spoken about this at least 2 or 3 times over the last decade and a half. They have a paddle system that's about this wide and about that thick and about this long. Excuse me. And you're a second or a third grader. And the teacher is angry with you because, not with you, but with the students, because one student misbehaved, him or herself. And because they wouldn't fess up, she paddled every single student in the class. She had them march out to the hallway, and one by one, she picked up that paddle and she hit the back of a child with this big piece of wood. Now, can you imagine the shock that it had to the system, the nerve system, and the spine of the child? Because sometimes she was going to hit the rear end, but she missed and she hit the spine. It's just something you never forget, and you would never want any other child to have to go through that. And at Catholic school, the nuns had this huge ruler, and they used to hit you. You know, she used to reach across from her desk without even having to get up. If she was going to attack a child that was near her desk, she would just smack the heck out of a kid. And the priest would do the same thing. You know, when you go to confession and you're only in the second or third grade after you've made your communion and your confirmation, one of the most confusing things to me was confessing to something that I didn't even know I was supposed to know was a bad thing because I was a kid. And all of those things have evolved into fighting back. If I do something wrong, I have to own up to it. That's fine. But when you're a kid and you're scared out of your wits, you may or may not tell the truth. But that doesn't mean that adult has the right to beat you with a stick, with a paddle, with their hand, with their fist, as this guy did, because the word pummel was used in this article. Didn't say slap. Pummel means closed fist on a 10-year-old child. Or you have the verbal assaults of the verbal cruelty that students will impose on another student that they don't find acceptable. Imagine having to get up every day and get dressed to go to school and dread going to school because you never know if that day they're going to continue their verbal hazing and their abuse. What it does to the nervous system, to the stomach, the fear that lives inside of a child when they go to those circumstances every day at school, and the cruelty of the treatment that so many find funny. Or on a school bus where a girl is sexually assaulted or a boy is beaten half to death because a bunch of boys decide to gang up on one kid. How many times over the years have I read these stories on air about the cruelty, about having no video systems on these school buses to protect children from the predatory mindset of some of the students that are transported back and forth? How they should be banned from riding a school bus if they cannot conduct themselves in an orderly manner, in a non-offensive physical or verbal manner. You know, if parents boycotted the school system by keeping their kids home, deliberately keeping their kids home until the Department of Education got their mindset straight and included the parents and the rights of their students and the programs that they're trying to impose on their students, before these kids went back, the parents would feel comfortable sending their kids back to school. Now, this country has boycotted many outrageous treatment. So wouldn't it be interesting if parents boycotted sending their children to school to demonstrate to the education community that they are not going to put up with the mistreatment of their children, or expecting their children to programs that the parents were never advised their children were exposed to. In a couple of episodes that I did, there was an episode where I spoke about an electronic device that was put on a child, and it left marks on the child's wrist, and the parents didn't know about that. The parents did not know that their child was being subjected to this kind of testing, monitoring system. So where in the hell does the school system of any city, much less Manchester, New Hampshire, get the gall to violate the rights of the students and to keep that information from their parents? It's like a dictatorship. It really is like a dictatorship. And it appears to be to minimize the educational level of children going to school today, tomorrow, and in the next generation, because humankind has needed slavery since day one. Since day one. All of these temples and all of these monuments that have been built in the past were built by slaves. They weren't paid. They just had to get up every day and work under the worst conditions, under strenuous conditions, under deadly conditions, where sometimes they didn't live the day out because of a job on an accident on the job. So, what kind of humanitarianism is being practiced in the city of Manchester? Not to mention the rest of the United States and its territories, because this is a national concern. This education, this seemingly Orwellian type of mindset, that in order to keep slavery alive, they have to minimize the educational factor of a certain segment of each and every community, so that all of these jobs that need doing will be filled by people desperate for work. And if you think that I'm Looney Tunes, just think about it. You know, I was at the Dollar Tree yesterday or the day before, and there was this very tall, large woman, cashing out. She had every kind of junk food you could imagine in her shopping cart. She spent almost $40 on junk food, and I knew that she was either a refugee or an immigrant by the clothes she was wearing and what she had around her head. And to her, that was a treat, but she doesn't know about the chemical that are put into these treats. Mainly aspartame or phenylene, and how she might be, without realizing it, of course, debilitating the next generation of her family. Because I'm telling you, she had bags and bags of all kinds of candy and popcorn and crackers and cookies. And of course, I couldn't say anything to her to try to help her to realize, because it wouldn't have made any sense, and it would have been an intrusion. But every time I see that, I just, when I go to the supermarket and I see people in the sugar aisle, and they're paying $10 to $12 for aspartame Splenda, I cringe to know that these people are going to go home and ingest this stuff, and it's already in their system, and it's going to debilitate them even more. Why our country has not, what's the word I'm looking for here? Stop the manufacture of all kinds of phenylene or aspartame or chemically generated sugar substitutes is beyond my understanding. It is a deadly poison. It is deadly. And if you start with a child when they're, 1, 2, 3 years old with cookies and candy and popcorn? And what about the diabetic? What it does to their system, which is already compromised by that condition. I urge people to read your labels, even if you have to pay a little more for a better product or better manufactured product. Read your labels. If you can't pronounce the word, you know it's a chemical. And if there's nothing but chemically related labeling on this product, drop it like a hot potato. Because it may taste good, but it's deadly for you, especially if you're a repetitive eater of these items. I've been trying to learn how to drink coffee without sugar. And it's really a good taste. I still use sugar once in a while, but I'm trying to wean myself off. Because a lot of products that are sold on American shelves come from other countries where there is no concern about food content, even though they have American brands. And the labels are printed with all this information. Purdue Chicken has an advertisement where they grow, or I shouldn't say grow, but where they raise chickens, chemical-free. And chickens that come from foreign countries, you don't know what kind of seed, especially if it's Monsanto or DuPont or any of the other American chemical companies that have locations in foreign countries where they generate and feed poisonous seeds to livestock of every kind, to poultry of every kind. You know, there is so much money to be made by doing it right and doing it ethically that the only thing that comes to mind is that these people are so deviant that they have to have the pleasure of getting away with hurting humanity. There's a, I don't know, it's almost like an addiction, and they have to have the fix. They have to have that fix to hurt somebody, to sit in a room and plan all of these obstacles of disclosure and transparency. There is a publication. It's called Censored, and it goes back to way back to I think 1995 when they first started. And it tells you stories, or it elaborates on stories that were in the news but not fully disclosed or not fully reported for obvious reasons, because a lot of these publications were members of these college level fraternities and sororities. And sometimes the women are deadlier than the men. They have no conscience. They're so caught up in the pomp and circumstance of that high financial life that it's almost like an addiction. They have to stay doing that so they can feel that power that they appear to need in order to function as a human being. And this other thing about testing animals, today we have computers that can identify the most microscopic, you can't even hardly see it, component of anything, of what it entails as far as the description of it, if it's good for human consumption, if it's a poison, if it's whatever. So why do they have to torture animals and human beings? These colleges that have these studies, for a professor that wants to excel in his capacity, using human college students as human guinea pigs that end up killing those students because they were not advised of the potential for a deadly reaction to whatever the item was that they were testing, or it was camouflaged. And you know, if a student is paying his or her way through school, they're desperate for any kind of money that would help them to pay for their education. So cruelty is a human thing that can be at any level of society. But most of all, it appears to be at the higher level, because there's no consciousness there, or conscience. They appear to be devoid of humanitarianism. There's a selectivism, there's a totalitarianism, there is a Gestapo type of mentality, a regime type of mentality, where the only way that they can feel powerful or important is to hurt other people and get paid for doing it. I've said this many times in many of my programs. As children, through the generations, we were taught to respect title from family, your parents, your grandparents, whatever, elders, to the schools, to the church, to where you worked. And if you were a village person that lived in a small town south or west of the Mason-Dixon line, or south and north of the Mason-Dixon line, or in a Spanish or otherwise other language-speaking country, their world was just that immediate location where they plowed the fields, or they tilled the soil, or they grew crops, or they handled the livestock, or they built whatever. So the word jefe means chief in Spanish. And this was the mindset for millennia. They were the people that the people of that time frame had to respect and had to work for, because they were taught that was the way it was. And the only way that I or anybody else who has any self-respect can obey someone with a title is if they're operating ethically and constitutionally. And that is not always the case. And I've said this again and again. Most of the victimization is for the poorly educated or who have been so subjugated that they don't feel that they have the right to defend themselves. I've met people like that. They're so afraid of complaining that they rather deal with it than complain for fear of retaliation. Not only from their landlords or their employer, but from family members themselves, who ride herd over their lives every single day. So I can only respect those that respect the rule of law. They can hold the most glorious title in the world, but if they're misusing it or they're acting unconstitutionally or they're hurting people, I cannot and will not respect them. You know, a person has a right to their own opinion. But when they take it to the level of violating a violation, then it's a crime. It's not an opinion, because it doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold water. I'm going to be checking this book out over this next week, and I have a 2014 copy coming up that I ordered because there is a website censored that you can go on the internet, and I wanted to join that because it's only $5 a month, but they have PayPal, and I had a very serious problem with PayPal some years ago when I was trying to sell my comic books on eBay, and they really messed it up so bad that I had to change banks, and I had to close my checking account and my credit cards, because at that time I still had credit. And go to another bank, because no matter how many times I advised them that I wasn't going to sell my items on eBay anymore or use PayPal, eBay kept billing me and charging me. And so I chose an alternate route. Instead of ordering from the source, I ordered from Barnes & Noble, and Amazon also has their publications. But if you want to deal with PayPal, you can go to their website, and also there's another website, www.7stories.com, that publishes the censored publications, and they have a whole lineup of how many books they've authored through the years, through the decades, covering the true concerns of constitutionality in all of its formats. Sylvia Browne was a very learned woman, even though a lot of people don't agree with the fact that she was a psychic and she was a spiritualist. But again, she was never sued for any of her publications because she used valid historical references to dig out the truth. And when I read the names of some of the political entities that were referenced in her book, it wasn't to denigrate 99% of them or to minimize them, but I can't help but mention Newt Gingrich and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld as some of the worst. Especially Donald Rumsfeld. He has gotten away, literally and figuratively, with murder on a grand scale. Hitler reportedly killed over 6 million people. Donald Rumsfeld has contributed to the death of over 200 million people worldwide, men, women, and children, and Mother Earth herself. When he opted to lift that poisonous chemical phenylalanine, also known as aspartame, that's used in equal and other sugar substitutes, sweet and low, that poison the human body. I have a couple of minutes, and I just want to add. When my mother lived in New York, she joined Weight Watchers because she was gaining weight, but it was all just in her midsection. And if I had known then what I know now about equal, because my mother used to use equal religiously in her cooking and in her coffee, and it was equal that had caused her midsection to swell so much because of aspartame and what it does to the human system. So if you care anything about your health or the health of your children or your parents or your grandparents or a friend, share the information. Go to your computer. If you don't have one, go to the library, because they have computers there. And look it up for yourself. You don't have to take my word for anything. Do your own research. Do your own research and find out for yourself. And try to fathom why our country allowed the lifting of the ban of phenylalanine, also known as aspartame, and all of the other names that it is known by in foreign and American territories, that has literally murdered millions of people across the planet. It's my time to go. I wish you knowledge. I wish you freedom. And please, please be very careful out here in the snow. Some people drive very recklessly, and it could cause an accident. If you don't have to go out, please don't go out. Remember, freedom isn't free, and so long until next time.